In August 2015, a 37-year-old man named Jordan Lynn Graham stood trial for the murder of her husband, Cody Johnson, who fell from a cliff inside Glacier National Park in July 2013. Johnson's body was found at the base of a rocky outcrop in the Flathead County portion of the park. What made the case extraordinary wasn't just the crime itself. It was how long the park's terrain concealed the truth. The body lay undiscovered for days in a landscape so vast, so vertical, and so indifferent to human presence that even a deliberate act of violence could disappear inside it. Graham was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder, but the case left investigators, rangers, and the public with a question that had nothing to do with the crime. How many other people had this park swallowed, and for how many of them did we never find out why? This national park is loved by millions of visitors every year. But what most people don't know is the dark truth hidden beneath its beauty. Stay until the end to discover the shocking reality. Glacier National Park sits in the northwest corner of Montana, pressed against the Canadian border like a secret the continent is trying to keep. It covers just over 1 million acres. That number sounds manageable until you stand inside it. 1 million acres of jagged peaks, ancient ice fields, dense conifer forest, and glacially carved valleys that drop hundreds of feet without warning. The park contains more than 700 miles of maintained hiking trails, but those trails represent only a fraction of the terrain. The rest is wilderness in the truest sense of the word, unmapped, unpatrolled, and largely unchanged since the last ice age. The park was established on May 11th, 1910, making it one of the oldest in the American National Park system. It shares a border with Canada's Waterton Lakes National Park, and together they form the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, designated in 1932 as the world's first international peace park. That designation speaks to the park's grandeur, its cross-border scale, its symbolic weight, but it says nothing about what it costs to move through it. The Rocky Mountains here are not the gentle, rounded mountains of the Appalachians. These are the Lewis Overthrust, a geological formation where ancient Precambrian rock, over 1 billion years old, was pushed eastward over younger rock during a massive tectonic event roughly 170 million years ago. The result is a landscape that looks like it was assembled by force, because it was. Cliffs don't slope here. They drop. Ridgelines don't curve. They fracture. The park's highest point, Mount Cleveland, rises to 10,466 feet, but elevation alone doesn't explain the danger. It's the combination of elevation, exposure, weather, and the speed at which all three can change simultaneously. The park's name is a promise that is slowly being broken. When naturalist George Bird Grinnell first explored the region in the 1880s and helped advocate for its protection, the park contained an estimated 150 glaciers. By 2015, the U.S. Geological Survey confirmed that number had dropped to 26 active glaciers. Scientists project that under current warming trends, those remaining glaciers could disappear entirely by 2030 or 2050, depending on the model. The park is literally melting, and as it melts, it changes. The snowpack shifts, the meltwater patterns alter, the trails that were stable for decades become undermined by water moving through rock in new ways. But here is the contradiction that defines Glacier's danger. As the glaciers retreat, the park becomes more accessible. More trails open earlier in the season. More visitors arrive. The window of apparent safety expands. And yet the underlying hazards, the unstable terrain, the unpredictable weather, the sheer remoteness, do not shrink with the ice. They simply become less visible. In 2023, Glacier National Park recorded approximately 3.1 million visitors. That number has been climbing steadily for years. In 2016, the park introduced a vehicle reservation system for the Going to the Sun Road because traffic had become so severe that the road was functionally inaccessible during peak hours. The park was designed for a different era of visitation. Its infrastructure, its ranger staffing levels, its search and rescue capacity, all of it was built around a smaller, more experienced visitor base. What it receives now is something else entirely. The Going to the Sun Road is the park's most famous feature, and in many ways, its most deceptive one. Completed in 1932, after 11 years of construction, the road crosses the Continental Divide at Logan Pass, elevation 6,646 feet, threading through terrain that engineers at the time considered nearly impossible to navigate. It is 50 miles long. It is, by any measure, an engineering achievement. And it is the reason millions of people believe they have experienced Glacier National Park when they have, in fact, only driven through a narrow corridor of it. The road creates an illusion. You are in a car. You have a map. You have a cell phone. You have a GPS. You are on a paved surface with guardrails. The mountains are outside the window, framed like a painting. The danger feels aesthetic rather than real. This psychological effect, the sense that infrastructure equals safety, is one of the most consistent factors in the park's most serious incidents. People step off the road and into the wilderness, carrying the confidence of someone who just drove through it, not the preparation of someone about to enter one of the most unforgiving environments in North America. Cell service in Glacier is not a minor inconvenience. It is functionally non-existent across most of the park's interior. The valleys are too deep, the ridgelines too high, the terrain too complex for reliable signal. Visitors who have spent their entire lives in environments where a phone call is always possible suddenly find themselves in a place where that assumption is simply false, and the transition happens without warning. You are connected, and then you are not, and the mountains do not care which one you were expecting. Weather in Glacier does not follow the patterns that most visitors are prepared for. The park sits at the intersection of Pacific maritime air masses moving east and Arctic continental air masses moving south. The result is a meteorological environment that can shift from clear skies to whiteout conditions in under an hour. In July, temperatures at Logan Pass can drop below freezing overnight, even when the valley floor is in the 70s. Afternoon thunderstorms are not occasional events. They are a near-daily feature of summer in the park, and they arrive with lightning that has nowhere to go except the exposed ridgelines where hikers tend to be. In June 2019, a 32-year-old hiker was struck by lightning near the Highline Trail, one of the park's most popular routes. The Highline Trail runs along the garden wall, a narrow arête that offers almost no shelter and sits directly in the path of afternoon storm systems moving in from the west. The hiker survived but required emergency evacuation. The incident was documented in park records and reported by local Montana media. What it illustrated was not bad luck. It was a predictable outcome of a predictable pattern that the park's own literature warns about explicitly, and that visitors consistently underestimate because the morning sky was clear when they started. The park's weather station data, maintained in part through cooperation with the National Weather Service, shows that Logan Pass receives an average of 89 inches of precipitation per year, much of it as snow. The snowpack at higher elevations can persist well into July. Trails that appear on maps as open routes can be buried under several feet of consolidated snow in early summer, with no visual indication from below that the upper sections are impassable. Hikers who begin a trail in dry conditions at the trailhead can encounter snow, ice, and near-vertical exposure within a few miles. The park's rivers and streams are a category of danger that receives far less attention than its cliffs and weather, and that disproportion is itself dangerous. Glacier's waterways are fed by snowmelt and glacial runoff, which means their volume and velocity are not constant. A stream that is ankle-deep in the morning can become waist-deep and fast-moving by early afternoon, as the day's heat accelerates snowmelt at higher elevations. The water temperature in these streams rarely exceeds 40 degrees Fahrenheit, even in midsummer. Cold water incapacitation. The physiological process by which cold water rapidly impairs muscle function and cognitive ability can begin within minutes of immersion. On July 30th, 2016, a 12-year-old boy named Kai Mata was swept into McDonald Creek near the Trail of the Cedars area of the park. He was recovered downstream and did not survive. The incident was reported by the Flathead Beacon and confirmed in National Park Service records. McDonald Creek is not a remote backcountry waterway. It runs through one of the park's most visited corridors. The Trail of the Cedars is a paved, accessible loop trail. The danger was not hidden in the wilderness. It was present in one of the most trafficked areas of the park, in a stream that looked, to a casual observer, like a beautiful mountain creek. That case reveals something important about how Glacier's dangers are distributed. They are not concentrated in the backcountry, accessible only to those who venture deep into the wilderness. They are present at the edges, at the overlooks, at the creek crossings, at the places where the park's beauty is most concentrated and most accessible. The most dangerous moments in Glacier are often the ones that feel the most ordinary. The park's wildlife is another dimension of danger that operates on its own logic, independent of human expectations. Glacier is home to one of the densest concentrations of grizzly bears in the contiguous United States. The park's grizzly population is estimated at between 300 and 350 individuals, according to research conducted by the Glacier National Park Bear Management Program. These are not the habituated bears of Yellowstone, accustomed to decades of human presence and food conditioning. Glacier's grizzlies are wild in a way that is increasingly rare in the lower 48 states. On August 13, 1967, 2 young women were killed by grizzly bears in separate incidents on the same night in Glacier National Park. Michelle Coons, 19, was killed at Trout Lake. Julie Helgeson, 19, was killed at Granite Park Chalet. The 2 attacks occurred miles apart, within hours of each other, and neither victim had any warning. The events of that night, later documented in Jack Olson's 1969 book, Night of the Grizzlies, which drew on park records, witness accounts, and investigative reports, fundamentally changed how the National Park Service managed bears across the entire national park system. Backcountry food storage regulations, bear canister requirements, and campsite management protocols that are now standard across American wilderness areas trace their origins directly to that night in Glacier. What the 1967 attacks revealed was not that grizzly bears are monsters. They are not. They are apex predators operating within their own ecological logic. What the attacks revealed was that human beings, when they enter grizzly habitat, are no longer at the top of the food chain. That is not a metaphor. It is a biological fact. And Glacier is one of the few places in the contiguous United States where that fact remains operationally true. The park's mountain goats are a less obvious but genuinely significant hazard. Glacier has a substantial mountain goat population, and the animals are habituated to human presence in ways that create unpredictable encounters. Mountain goats are not aggressive by nature, but they are large. Adult males can weigh over 300 pounds, and they are extraordinarily sure-footed on terrain that is lethal to humans. Encounters on narrow trails where a goat refuses to yield have resulted in hikers being forced off the path onto unstable ground. The National Park Service has documented multiple incidents of mountain goats approaching hikers aggressively, particularly in areas where the animals have learned to associate humans with salt from sweat and urine. but the goats point to a broader truth about Glacier's wildlife dynamics. The park is not a zoo. The animals here have not been managed into predictability. They exist within a functioning ecosystem that was here long before the park was established, and that operates according to rules that have nothing to do with visitor safety. When you enter Glacier, you enter that ecosystem. You do not observe it from outside. The park's search and rescue operations are conducted primarily by the National Park Service's own ranger staff, supplemented by Flathead County Search and Rescue and, in major incidents, by military helicopter assets from Malmstrom Air Force Base. The terrain makes aerial rescue extremely difficult. High winds, narrow valleys, and the park's complex topography limit helicopter operations to specific weather windows. Ground rescue in the backcountry can take days. The park's most remote areas are more than 20 miles from the nearest trailhead, through terrain that requires technical climbing skills to navigate. Between 2007 and 2017, Glacier National Park averaged approximately 10 to 15 search and rescue operations per year, according to data compiled by the National Park Service. That number has increased as visitation has grown. In 2021, the park conducted more than 30 search and rescue operations. The increase is not proportional to the increase in visitation. It is steeper, suggesting that the composition of the visitor base is changing, that more people are arriving with less experience and less preparation than in previous decades. The cost of a search and rescue operation in Glacier can reach tens of thousands of dollars. Unlike some states, Montana does not charge individuals for search and rescue operations, even when those operations are the direct result of negligence or inadequate preparation. The financial burden falls on the park, on the county, and ultimately on taxpayers. But the more important cost is the one that cannot be measured in dollars. The risk to the rangers and volunteers who conduct these operations in conditions that are dangerous by definition. In September 2020, a 34-year-old hiker named Jonathan Kroom went missing in the backcountry near the Belly River area of the park. Kroom had entered the park alone and had not filed a detailed trip plan. His vehicle was found at the Chief Mountain Border Crossing trailhead. A search operation involving park rangers, Flathead County Search and Rescue, and aerial assets covered the area for multiple days. Kroom's remains were found in October 2020 in a remote section of the park. The cause of death was determined to be hypothermia. He had been approximately 10 miles from the nearest trailhead when he died. The Kroom case illustrates a pattern that appears repeatedly in Glacier's incident history. Solo travel, inadequate trip planning, no filed itinerary, rapid onset of conditions that exceeded the hiker's preparation. The Belly River area where Kroom was traveling is not technically demanding by Glacier standards. It does not require ropes or technical climbing. It is a backcountry hiking area. But backcountry in Glacier means something specific. It means you are in a place where the margin for error is measured not in inconvenience, but in survival. Hypothermia is the mechanism of death that appears most frequently in Glacier's fatality records, and it is the one that most consistently surprises people. The word conjures images of blizzards, of extreme cold, of conditions that are obviously dangerous. But hypothermia can develop at temperatures well above freezing. Wet clothing, wind, and exhaustion can drive core body temperature down in conditions that feel merely uncomfortable rather than life-threatening. A hiker who gets caught in an afternoon rainstorm at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, who is wet and tired and miles from shelter, is in genuine danger. The mountains do not announce that danger. They simply allow it to proceed. The park's geology creates hazards that are invisible until they are not. Rockfall is a constant feature of Glacier's landscape. The park's cliffs are composed of ancient sedimentary rock, argillite, limestone, and dolomite that has been fractured by millions of years of freeze-thaw cycles. Every winter, water seeps into cracks in the rock, freezes, expands, and widens those cracks. Every spring, sections of cliff face that have been weakened over decades or centuries finally release. The timing of these releases is unpredictable. There is no warning. There is no pattern that a hiker can observe and respond to. In July 2014, a rockfall event on the Garden Wall near the Highline Trail deposited debris across the trail and into the valley below. No hikers were injured in that specific event, but the incident was documented by park staff and resulted in a temporary trail closure. The Garden Wall is one of the most heavily trafficked sections of trail in the park. The rockfall did not occur in a remote area. It occurred on a route that thousands of people walk every summer. The park's avalanche history adds another dimension to this geological instability. Glacier receives enough snowfall and has enough steep terrain to generate significant avalanche activity every winter and into the spring. The Going to the Sun Road is closed every winter, partly because of avalanche risk, and the process of clearing it each spring, which typically takes until late June, involves avalanche mitigation work by park crews. Avalanche debris fields are visible from the road in early summer, massive piles of compacted snow and broken timber that illustrate the scale of the forces involved. Hikers who venture onto snow-covered slopes in early season without avalanche awareness training are operating in terrain that has already demonstrated its capacity for catastrophic movement. The park's altitude affects human physiology in ways that visitors from lower elevations consistently underestimate. Acute mountain sickness can begin at elevations as low as 6,000 feet in susceptible individuals. Logan Pass sits at 6,646 feet. The park's higher trails and peaks reach well above 8,000 feet. Symptoms of altitude sickness: headache, nausea, fatigue, impaired judgment, can develop within hours of arrival at elevation, particularly in visitors who drove up from sea level and began hiking immediately. Impaired judgment at altitude is particularly dangerous because the impairment itself reduces the individual's ability to recognize that they are impaired. The combination of altitude, exertion, dehydration, and sun exposure creates a physiological environment that is genuinely different from what most visitors have experienced before. The air at Logan Pass contains roughly 20% less oxygen than air at sea level. The ultraviolet radiation at that elevation is significantly more intense. The dry air accelerates dehydration. A visitor who feels fine at the trailhead may be in serious physiological difficulty 2 hours later, miles from help, in terrain that does not permit a simple turnaround. The park's history of fatal falls is extensive and spans the entire history of the park's existence as a public destination. Falls from cliffs, from trail edges, from snow-covered slopes, and from stream crossings account for a significant portion of the park's fatality record. The National Park Service does not publish a comprehensive, publicly accessible database of all fatalities in individual parks. But researchers and journalists who have compiled incident records from park reports, county coroner records, and news archives have documented dozens of fatal falls in Glacier over the park's history. In August 2010, a 17-year-old visitor named Elon Burak fell approximately 200 feet from a cliff near the Hidden Lake Overlook area. The incident was reported by the Missoulian and confirmed in park records. The Hidden Lake Overlook is one of the most visited destinations in the park, accessible via a 2.7-mile round-trip trail from Logan Pass. It is not a remote backcountry location. It is a destination that families with children visit regularly. The trail passes through alpine meadows and along ridgelines with significant exposure. The combination of high visitor volume, spectacular scenery, and genuine vertical exposure creates conditions where the probability of a serious fall is not negligible. What the Borak case and others like it reveal is that the park's most dangerous locations are not always its most remote ones. The concentration of visitors at popular overlooks and viewpoints means that the absolute number of serious incidents at those locations can be higher than in the backcountry, even if the per-visitor risk is lower. The park's beauty draws people to its edges. Its edges are, by definition, where the terrain drops away. The park's water quality presents a hazard that is almost entirely invisible. Glaciers, streams, and lakes look pristine. The water is cold, clear, and visually indistinguishable from treated drinking water. But Glacier's backcountry water sources are not safe to drink untreated. The parasite Giardia lamblia is present throughout the park's water system, transmitted through the feces of infected animals, including the park's large populations of deer, elk, and bears. Giardia infection produces symptoms: severe gastrointestinal distress, dehydration, fatigue, that can be debilitating in the backcountry, where access to medical care is days away. The park also has a documented history of cryptosporidium contamination in some water sources. Both Giardia and cryptosporidium are resistant to iodine treatment, which was for many years the standard backcountry water treatment method. Visitors who rely on iodine tablets and drink untreated water believing it to be safe are taking a risk that may not manifest until they are back in civilization, or may manifest in the backcountry at the worst possible time. This is a category of danger that operates on a delay. You make the mistake, and you don't know you've made it for days. By the time the symptoms appear, you may be far from the source of the problem, and the connection between the water you drank and the illness you're experiencing may not be obvious. The park's water looks like safety. It is not. The park's fire history is a dimension of its danger that has grown more significant in recent decades. Glacier sits within the broader Northern Rockies fire ecology, a region where fire is a natural and necessary part of the ecosystem. But as climate change has extended the fire season, increased temperatures, and reduced snowpack, the scale and frequency of fires in and around the park have increased substantially. The 2003 Robert Fire burned approximately 38,000 acres within the park. The 2015 Reynolds Creek Fire burned over 4,900 acres and forced the closure of significant portions of the park during peak summer season. The 2017 Sprague Fire burned near Sperry Chalet, one of the park's historic backcountry chalets, and caused significant structural damage to the chalet's main building. These fires are not anomalies. They are part of a pattern that park managers, climate scientists, and fire ecologists have documented and projected to continue. For visitors, fire creates hazards that extend beyond the obvious. Smoke from fires within and adjacent to the park can reduce visibility, impair respiratory function, and create navigation challenges for hikers who rely on visual landmarks. Post-fire terrain, burned slopes with destabilized root systems, standing dead trees, and altered drainage patterns, creates rockfall and debris flow hazards that persist for years after the fire itself. A trail that was safe before a fire may be genuinely dangerous after one, and the visual cues that indicate that danger are not always obvious to visitors who are not trained to read post-fire landscapes. The park's backcountry permit system, introduced to manage the volume of overnight visitors, has created a dynamic that is worth examining carefully. The permit system is designed to protect the park's wilderness character and to prevent overuse of fragile ecosystems. It is a conservation tool, and it works as intended for that purpose. But it has an unintended consequence. It creates pressure on visitors to complete their planned itineraries regardless of conditions. A visitor who has secured a backcountry permit for a specific campsite on a specific night has invested time, money, and planning in that reservation. When conditions deteriorate, when weather turns, when a trail is more difficult than expected, when a member of the group is struggling, the sunk cost of the permit creates psychological pressure to continue rather than turn back. This is not a hypothetical dynamic. It is a pattern that park rangers have observed and documented in incident reports. The decision to turn back is always the right decision when conditions warrant it. The permit system inadvertently makes that decision harder. In the summer of 2019, a 27-year-old hiker named Casey Bolin went missing in the backcountry near the Two Medicine area of the park. Bolin had been hiking alone and had not returned to her vehicle by the expected time. A search operation was launched involving park rangers and Glacier County Search and Rescue. Bolin was found alive after approximately 24 hours, having become disoriented in fog and unable to navigate back to the trail. She had spent the night in the open without adequate shelter or clothing for the conditions. The Bolin case did not end in tragedy, but it illustrates a mechanism that has ended in tragedy for others. Disorientation in Glacier's backcountry is not simply a matter of getting lost. It is a matter of getting lost in terrain where the consequences of being lost are severe. The park's valleys and ridgelines can look similar from different angles. Fog and low clouds can eliminate the visual landmarks that hikers rely on for navigation. A GPS device can tell you where you are, but cannot tell you how to get from where you are to where you need to be through terrain that may be impassable. The gap between knowing your coordinates and knowing your route is, in Glacier, a gap that can kill you. The park's history includes a category of incident that receives almost no public attention: the deaths and injuries that occur on the Going to the Sun road itself. The road is narrow, with sections where two vehicles can barely pass each other. It has no guardrails in many sections. The drop-offs along its western sections are hundreds of feet. The road is driven by millions of people every year, many of whom have never driven on mountain roads, in vehicles that range from compact cars to large RVs, which are actually prohibited on certain sections of the road above Avalanche Creek due to their size. Vehicle accidents on the Going to the Sun road have resulted in fatalities throughout the park's history. The National Park Service does not publish a comprehensive accident database for the road, but incident reports compiled from park records and local news sources document multiple fatal accidents over the decades. The combination of narrow lanes, steep drop-offs, distracted driving, visitors looking at the scenery rather than the road, and the presence of cyclists and pedestrians on the road creates a hazard profile that is genuinely significant. In 2017, a vehicle went off the road near the Loop, a sharp hairpin turn on the road's western side, and fell several hundred feet. The incident was reported by local Montana media. The occupants survived, which is remarkable given the terrain. The road's beauty is inseparable from its danger. The views that make it one of the most photographed roads in America are the same views that draw drivers' eyes away from the road surface. The park's winter and shoulder season conditions represent a category of danger that is almost entirely separate from the summer experience that most visitors have. The park receives an average of 150 inches of snow per year at lower elevations and significantly more at higher elevations. The Going to the Sun road is closed from approximately mid-October to late June. The park's visitor infrastructure, ranger stations, campgrounds, visitor centers, is largely closed or operating at minimal capacity outside the summer season. Visitors who enter the park in the shoulder seasons, May, early June, September, October, encounter a fundamentally different environment than the one depicted in the park's promotional materials. Trails that are clear and well marked in July may be buried under several feet of snow in May. Stream crossings that are straightforward in late summer may be dangerous or impassable during spring runoff. The park's wildlife is more active and less predictable in the shoulder seasons, with bears emerging from hibernation in spring in a state of hyperphagia, intense hunger, that makes them more likely to approach human food sources aggressively. The shoulder seasons also attract a different type of visitor, people who specifically want to avoid the summer crowds, who are often more experienced and better prepared than peak season visitors, but who are also operating in conditions with less ranger presence, less infrastructure support, and less margin for error. The park does not become safer when it becomes less crowded. In some respects, it becomes more dangerous, because the systems that exist to catch mistakes, ranger patrols, other hikers on the trail, accessible emergency services, are less present. Glacier is home to one of the densest grizzly bear populations in the contiguous United States. The park's bear management protocols, food storage requirements, campsite design, ranger education are sophisticated and evidence-based. But they operate within a landscape where the fundamental risk cannot be eliminated, only managed. In July 2010, a 57-year-old man named John Wallace was killed by a grizzly bear while hiking near the Sia Pass area. Wallace was an experienced hiker who had visited the park many times. He was carrying bear spray. The bear was a female grizzly with cubs, the highest risk encounter profile. His case is significant, not because it represents a failure of preparation, but because it illustrates the irreducible nature of the risk. Bear spray is highly effective. It is not a guarantee. Experience reduces risk. It does not eliminate it. Glacier National Park is one of the most magnificent landscapes in North America. It is also one of the most genuinely dangerous. Not dangerous in the manufactured, liability-conscious way that warning signs suggest, but dangerous in the older, more fundamental sense. A place where the natural world operates by rules that have nothing to do with human comfort or survival. Every year, millions of people enter the park and leave safely. But every year, others do not. Their names appear in incident reports, in county coroner records, in the archives of local Montana newspapers. They came for the same reasons as everyone else. They loved the mountains. They wanted the experience. The difference between their outcome and the millions who returned safely is not always a matter of preparation or experience. Sometimes it is a matter of inches, of minutes, of a single step on a wet rock. The park's most important safety resource is not bear spray, though bear spray saves lives. It is not a satellite communicator, though satellite communicators have enabled rescues that would otherwise have been impossible. It is accurate self-knowledge, the ability to honestly assess what you know, what you can do, and where the boundary of your competence actually lies. That kind of self-knowledge is rare. It requires a willingness to say, in the face of a beautiful trail and a clear morning sky, and a permit that cost months of planning to secure, that today is not the day, that this trail is not the right trail, that turning back is the right decision. The park does not make that easy. Its beauty is a form of pressure. Its scale is a form of seduction. There is a moment many visitors describe, somewhere on a high trail or at the edge of a ridge, when the landscape becomes suddenly, viscerally real. The valley floor is 1,000 feet below. The nearest road is miles away. The sky is enormous and the wind is cold. In that moment, the park reveals itself as something other than a scenic backdrop. It reveals itself as a place that exists entirely on its own terms, indifferent to human plans, indifferent to the gap between what a visitor expected and what the mountain actually is. Most people respond to that moment correctly. They feel the weight of it, adjust their behavior, become more careful and humble. Some do not. They continue up the trail. They cross the stream. They stay out past dark. They make the small decision that becomes the large consequence. Glacier is not trying to kill anyone. It is simply itself. A billion-year-old landscape operating according to physical laws that predate human existence by an incomprehensible margin. The danger is not in the park. The danger is in the gap between what the park is and what visitors believe it to be. The question is not whether to go. The question is whether you understand what you are entering when you do.